viewers, and welcome yet again to another episode of Dinner Guide. I am your host, Chef Andy, and today we're going to be working on something somewhat different with beans. We're going to be pairing that with some vegetables and turn it into a very fragrant curry. And we're also going to be making a very simple veg rice to go with that. But before we begin, definitely have to take you through the ingredients just to give you an idea of what to expect. Now, from the very front, you will require one medium-sized bullet chili, red of course. You'll also require one medium-sized red onion and 2 tablespoons of curry paste. You'll also require about 5 cloves of garlic, about 4 sprigs of leek, and 1 whole root of ginger that's already washed and peeled. You'll also require some 4 tomatoes and some fresh coriander, about 1 cup of some cooked red beans, and about half a cup of some mixed frozen vegetables. You also require some coconut milk, about 1/4 cup, about half a cup basmati rice that's not cooked. You also require some salt for seasoning, 1 whole red bell pepper, and last but not least, some oil to cook with. So we're going to give you this chance to grab your pens and papers if you're taking notes, and we'll catch you after a very short break. Welcome back, viewers. For those of you who are just tuning in, we're right about ready to begin the dish for today, which is a very simple bean curry. We're also going to be pairing that with some rice and some vegetables. So very important to mention, always start with the easiest first, and of course in this state it will be the rice. So I'll begin by adding my basmati rice into a pot. And we're going to basically just measure out about 2 parts of water to the same quantity rice. So add the first one and proceed to add the second one in the same measure. We are of course going to give that a bit of flavor. So for that, I'm going to be incorporating a bullet chili, which I'm of course just going to slice from the sides. And what happens is all this will do is allow a bit of flavor to seep through the pepper without of course adding any of the seeds into it. So onto your heat goes your rice. We'll just move it to the other end just to get some space to work on. Simple as that. Next up, proceed to season with a bit of some salt. And very importantly, small dash of oil, just to make sure that your rice does not, the rice grains don't actually stick to each other. So give that a very quick mix, and once that's done, you can proceed to cover and allow for the pot to come to its heat. And in the meantime, we will begin to reheat another pan that we'll be making our beans in. So very simple. We're going to begin, of course, by preparing our aromatics, and that's basically similar to what you do in most recipes, which of course start with your garlic, your ginger, and your onions. The only reason we do so is basically because this allows for you to be able to season and carry on the flavors from the beginning. And they also actually, as also very important to mention, they also cushion the addition of other ingredients in that they actually manage to be able to balance each of those flavors individually. Now we're going to finish off peeling this piece of onion, of course going around, making sure that your skins and your onion do not meet at any point. Proceed to discard the skins of the onion and you can now proceed to chop that finely. So using a sharp knife, begin by cutting some slits from over the top of your onion. Proceed to also slice once almost across and finish off by chopping that finely. And be sure to, of course, go around the stem end of the onion, making sure to discard that completely. And proceed to do the same for the other half. Cut almost right across. And proceed to finish off that first piece. And once again, proceed to discard the root. Now, very simply begin by adding your onions to your pot, right? Of course, after adding a bit of some oil. Right, once that's done, very easily proceed to chop up some garlic. So I'm going to be working with 2 cloves at this stage. Begin by tapping them very gently over your board and proceed to chop that very coarsely. Proceed to go over that once more or twice more with your sharp knife. Of course, looking for a more consistent chop. And of course, very important to mention, be sure not to have any pieces of the garlic go in big chunks. Otherwise, you will, of course, be able to pick them up from the view of the eye. So in goes your garlic. Proceed to mix that through with a spoon, giving that anywhere between 2 to 3 minutes just to proceed to color. And of course, for the onions to sweat out their juices. And in the meantime, we're also going to proceed to add our leek. So for this, I'm going to slice that whole, and I'll be slicing at a very narrow angle to the leek. This is just basically to be able to give it a nice, beautiful appearance once we serve. And of course, with the beautiful addition of some leeks, you will of course get a nice, beautiful butteriness to your sauce as well as your curry. Once that's done, discard the root end of your onion and proceed to add to the rest of your mixture. Mix through. And of course, just to cool your pan off, a little bit of some water. And what happens is this is actually going to be able to steam the onions, ensure that they're fully cooked without, of course, proceeding to add any more color to the mixture. And once that's done, we're going to proceed to add our ginger. So I'm going to slice that into half and then proceed to julienne that, of course, meaning slice into some very thin and very long pieces. Of course, turn that sideways and you can proceed to chop that a little finely. But of course, for the fact that we're looking at that beautiful bite and crispness of the ginger root, we're of course not going to chop that very finely or turn it into a paste. This of course always adds a nice beautiful burst of flavor, especially if you bite into the root. And we're going to add those as they are. Proceed to turn your heat up a little bit and give your mixture one more thorough mix through. Of course, making sure that the balance of onions from your mixture is of course very unique. A little bit of red and a little bit of the green, just to get a beautiful balance of color. And next up, we're also going to be adding to that our tomatoes. So I'm going to grab about 3 medium pieces of tomatoes, and by holding the front end of the knife, just going to proceed to remove the eyes of the tomato. And of course, this always aids in allowing for very little waste, especially for some of us who are very accustomed to slicing that end of the tomato off. This is of course a very simple tip to make sure that you don't actually lose any bit of your tomato whatsoever. So for this, you're going to grab each quarter and pretty much proceed to slice that very thinly. Remember, you do of course want this to break down very gently as you cook. And one particular trick of doing so is cutting them nice and long, and this way they'll actually be able to curl up and shrink in size very briefly. Right, once that's done, proceed to add those into your pot. Now remember, the fact that we're making a base for the sauce will of course require for us to start off with a bit of some chunky mix. So this is why of course we've opted to chop our tomatoes into slices. And once that's in, proceed to add your curry paste. And this is basically going to be the first step of assembling your sauce, and of course getting the texture of your base quite right. So you can now turn your heat a little higher, and as that continues to cook at high heat, proceed to add about half a cup of water. And we're basically going to allow this to proceed to cook for anywhere between 4 to 5 minutes, right up until the mixture just gets to the boiling point. And we'll now proceed to add our beans, allowing them to rehydrate in the oil, in the mixture, and of course proceed to cook through. Now remember, we also had some rice on the side, which we're going to give a quick look at. Just going to move my spoon around just to check on the rice. And this should actually be anywhere between 4 to 6 minutes away. We are of course going to allow that to cook undisturbed, and of course covered, to make sure that we can really trap the beautiful aromas of that beautiful beautiful bell pepper. And now, just to take us to the next step, we'll of course allow that to continue to cook. But before we allow that to proceed, you can now add your beans just as soon as you're able to witness or notice any bits of bubbling on the sides of your pot. And that will of course take us to the last and final part of this section. We will of course give you this chance to take a break and refresh, and when we do come back, I will of course show you what the rice looks like once cooked. I will of course also show you how to finish it off with the beautiful vegetables that we'll be mixing into that, and we'll of course come back to the curry and proceed to the last and final stage of plating. But before we do so, a small break for both of us, and we'll see you after a very short break. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. We're right about the last and final part of our simple dish for today. As I mentioned, very simple to achieve, a diverse amount of curries from the same technique we've used today. I could also mention, for some of you who are also looking at adding a little more spice to their cooking, or even a little bit of some chili to give it a bit of a heat, You can of course alternate some of the ingredients we use today and use some of your very own techniques as well. But as I mentioned, this is particularly for those who are still learning, those who are looking at the grassroots part of cooking. And this is a very, very simple way of managing to be able to do a very, very simple curry with, of course, the littlest of ingredients and, of course, with the maximum amount of flavor. Now, as this continues, we're also going to be pulling out the rice that we made a little earlier. And we're going to transfer that into a bowl. As I mentioned, we are going to be mixing this up with some vegetables. So I'm going to begin by fluffing up the rice by using a lifter. And at this stage, I'll also begin by removing that beautiful chili, which I'm going to lay on the counter here for you to see. As you can see, many techniques of incorporating chili into your cooking without, of course, tainting or even chopping up the chili on its own. And as you lean over the bowl that's in front of the counter at the moment, you can of course get some nice beautiful hints of an aroma that's more chili-like, but of course to the taste doesn't actually have any chili at all. But of course you may actually notice a little bit of change in color from the rice. Also a very, very simple technique that I could share with you all. Now remember, there's a beautiful acidity in this beautiful peppers that we're using on the show, and especially for the smaller ones, the beautiful juices that are contained in there. Of course, once you slice a chili open, or rather slice it from the sides and just allow the juices to come through, you will of course notice a difference in change of color and aroma in your dish. But you will of course not have the hotness that most of you will expect. But also very important to mention, if you're going to be using any different chili as opposed to a bullet chili or a red bell pepper, this will of course change the flavor quite a bit. And as you all know, the smaller the chili, the more the intensity of heated curries. So we're going to allow the rice to sit on the side undisturbed, giving us just a bit of time to refresh our vegetables. And this is a very, very simple process. Begin by adding just a little bit of oil to a pan. And all you're going to do is just saute them very, very briefly, just to really get them hydrated, and as well give them that little bit of coating with the oil, just to be able to mix that up with the rice and give it a nice, beautiful, shiny appearance. Now, while that continues to heat up, I'll bring your attention back to the beans. Now, this is basically reduced by double. I'm going to add my coconut milk at this stage. And remember, the coconut is basically just to bring that beautiful culture of curries, very much an Indian style or a Punjab style of making curries, where you actually incorporate a bit of milk from the coconut plant. But very, very simply, it actually just brings a beautiful balance of flavor, and very much similar to the Indian technique of cooking, coconut also enriches your meal quite a little bit by adding both color, flavor, and aroma. So once the coconut's in, you can lower your temperature completely at this stage, and you can proceed to grab your fresh coriander and just chop that very, very finely, or rather as fine as you possibly can. And considering the fact that we are going to be allowing it to cook in with the sauce, you can at this stage also incorporate the stems. It really won't make much of a difference. Right, once your coriander is in, proceed to give that a mix through, and you can turn that off completely. And this is now ready to serve. Now, just to bring your attention back to the veg, I'm just going to tilt the pan forward. You may also be able to notice that the pan is smoking hot. Add your vegetables, and all you need to do is allow the heat to really permeate through the veggies for a very, very short amount of time. Be sure to also toss your pan around. And as you do so, what happens is you actually manage to shock out any particular ice particles that still may actually be in your frozen veg. Of course, also bringing with it a little bit of an addition of color to especially your carrots. Just continue tossing that together. You can also optionally just season that with some salt. And of course add a small bit of oil if the pan is still too dry. Toss those through once more. And of course, while they're still hot off the pan, proceed to add those onto your rice. And you can begin to just fluff up your rice. Of course, allowing for the vegetables to just blend in flavor and aroma with the veg. And of course, also allows for you to break up those big heavy particles or chunks of rice that may actually still be stuck together. Simple as that. And remember, you can also be able to achieve the same by frying the rice on the heat. Of course, be very, very mindful of making sure that your rice isn't completely cooked to the end, else you'll actually end up with a very mushy consistency. Right, so just a quick chop of your coriander leaves. We're also going to add those to our rice. Remember, as I mentioned, very, very good addition, especially for finishing off various dishes. Also adds a very, very beautiful touch of nuttiness, of flavor, a little burst of color, and of course manages to harmonize most of the flavors in your dish. So give that about 3-4 turns of your bowl. Proceed to plate immediately after. Of course, making sure that to always plate your rice while it's still hot. So we're going to just spread that over onto the board in front of us. I'm going to be using a different style of plating for this dish. So I'm just going to scoop my rice onto one side of the plate. Of course, always making sure to always proceed to lift as you plate. And this will allow for you to get a nice, beautiful oomph of height. And of course, it does escalate the appearance of your dish on the plate. Right, simple as that. Now our rice is on the plate. I'm just going to set it in front of you to be able to have a look. And then of course, last but not least, our beans. So be sure to give that a nice fresh mix before proceeding to pour out onto your bowl of choice. Just give that a shake and you should be able to get all of your bean mixture out of your pan in one big continuous motion. Right, now as I mentioned, we were working on some very, very simple dishes today, which was of course the curried beans with some vegetable rice. I will also mention that this may not have actually gotten to the last and final stage of using. You can still of course use it in plating. Remember, the acids that are, or rather the niacin that's actually incorporated in the chili has actually now cooked away, which of course leaving a very, very simple and harmless chili for you to enjoy. Now we of course have come to the last and final part of the show, where I will thank you once again for tuning in this far and being with us to this very point. I will of course also thank you for the comments and inquiries that you've been sending in. They have actually been giving us quite a little bit of an awakening. And I do hope that the dishes that we present to you are of course to your liking. We are of course also going to share some serving tips with you, which of course simply mentioned. You can of course alternate the mixed veg and rice option for some fried veg rice. You can also alternatively serve your vegetables on the side if you prefer. But if you are looking for that beautiful combination of color and flavor, then that will definitely suit you quite well. And of course, to mention, for those of you who are not accustomed to using coconut or coconut milk products, you can also alternatively use some regular cream for your beans, or you can of course eliminate any traces of dairy whatsoever, still leaving you with a very, very good dish to enjoy with you and your family. But of course, you can also be able to alternate the flavor with such additions as coconut milk, coconut cream as well. A little thicker on the pouring side, but of course does carry and pack quite a bit of flavor. As I also mentioned, The use of chili on this particular episode was a little different from what you'd expect, so we actually used our bullet chili just to give the rice a bit of a flavor. But of course you can also chop that up and mix it in with the rice. It will also bring a beautiful burst of red sparks of color. But for that, we have come to the last and final part. I do have quite a bit of work left off for me to do, which is basically to clear off that plate. But I will of course leave you with a reminder that we are going to be airing some similar dishes in the future. So if you of course have missed out on what we did today, remember you can recap on this through our YouTube page, or you can of course make a reminder to always join us on the show from 7 p.m, which of course is on every single episode. Now we will of course wish you a beautiful day and a beautiful night at this stage. So do have a lovely evening, and until the next episode, God bless you all, and bye-bye.